3 minutes. Just as a reminder, we do have some survey questions up for everyone to answer, which will help Sorel in demonstrating some of his material that he's prepared for today. If you can answer those questions, great. Secondly, this webinar is being recorded for playback later. So if for some reason you have to leave or we're not able to join, it will be available for playback later. We will be starting in just about 2 to 3 minutes, so please be patient as people are still joining as we speak. Hello, everyone. This is Alan Schimmel, Editor-in-Chief of DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps. We're very, very happy to be partnering today with the folks integration and continuous delivery across the enterprise with Jenkins. We are scheduled to start right about now. We have a lot of people joining, though, and I'm thinking we may just wait 1 more minute or 2 to get some of the latecomers in. We will be joined today by Sorel Leclerc of CloudBees, who will be presenting the information. And Sorel has prepared a lot of content here, including live demos. We'll probably take the full hour on his presentation, and we will hold off time for questions at the conclusion of that. If you can put your questions into the chat box, we'll go from there. As I said, we're going to get started. Actually, it's 1:01. So Sorel, if you are there, I'm going to get started.
Yes, hello, Alan. Can you hear me?
Hello. Okay. Yes, I think we hear you well, and hopefully everyone else does as well. All right, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Alan Schimmel here at DevOps.com. Thank you so much for joining another one of our continuing webinars in a series we're doing. We're very lucky to have today Sorel Leclerc from CloudBees, who's going to be discussing continuous integration and continuous delivery across the enterprise with Jenkins. Hopefully when you logged in, you saw some survey questions that we've requested you answer. And that'll help Sorel with some of the demos and information that he's going to share with us today. The webinar will be recorded for later playback, so if for some reason you're unable to stay to the end, we will get started with that. I see a question, have we started the audio yet? And I'm hoping you all can hear me. Others have. So we will get started again. We are giving out a $100 Amazon gift card at the end of the webinar, which we'll pick a random winner for, and we will announce that. It seems like audio is working for everyone else, so I think we're good. So without further ado, then, let me introduce Cyril Leclerc of CloudBees. And Cyril, I'm going to hand it off to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining this webinar. Thank you, DevOps.com, for inviting me and inviting CloudBees to present this CI and CD across the enterprise with Jenkins. My name is Cyril Leclerc. I work for CloudBees. So first, please let me introduce myself. I am an engineer. I work at CloudBees in the product management team. I recently joined this team. I am involved in the open source community. I used to be a committer at the Apache Software Foundation on the Apache CXF project. I am very involved in the JMX Trans project, which is a Java monitoring framework. And I also contribute to Jenkins. And I am interested in DevOps, infrastructure as code, continuous delivery, and things like this. The agenda today, we will cover three different aspects of Jenkins in the enterprise. First, we will cover a new feature in Jenkins called Jenkins Workflow, and we will see how important it will be for people who design continuous delivery pipelines. The second part of this presentation will be around how to scale Jenkins in your organization and to onboard as many teams as possible. And the last step will be continuous delivery with Jenkins on Puppet and Chef. So here we will see how Jenkins can integrate with your configuration management tool, how you can automate deployments from Jenkins to your, let's say, Java application server using Puppet or Chef, and how can you get integration and feedbacks from Puppet and Chef inside Jenkins. First, a quick overview of what is continuous delivery. Many persons have many different definitions of continuous delivery. I like very much the vision of continuous delivery that Jez Humble and David Farley proposed in their book, and I will recommend you to look at this book if you didn't read it already. Their definition of continuous delivery is reliable software release through build, test, deployment, and deployment automation. And what is very interesting in their vision is that we have changed the definition of done. With Agile, the definition of done was when the unit tests were green. And now it completely changed because we go way further, we go way on the right of the process. If we look at continuous integration steps, we started with the source code. We triggered a compilation, triggered JUnit unit test, JUnit or whatever. Then we triggered quality analysis tools such as Sonar, PMD, check style, find bugs. And when all this was green, we pushed our application version, our binaries in a Maven repository, maybe Nexus, maybe Artifactory, or something similar with other programming languages. With continuous delivery, we involve much more steps. We continue to cover all the continuous integration steps, source code, compile on unit test, quality analysis, storing binaries, but we also integrate automated functional tests with tools like Selenium or Fitness. An automated test like this means to deploy the application on testing server, to reload database, to run tests like Selenium, which requires Windows on macOS workstation with web browsers. We collect all these results and then the test is done. We can do similar tests for performance. Here it can be JMeter or Gatling or another tool. We always have to deploy the application, reload databases, reload datasets, run the test, and collect results and metrics. Once we have done automated end-to-end test with which can be functional test or performance test, we then deploy on the user acceptance test environment. Different organizations have different names for this environment of this team. I mean the team with the human people who validate the application. Sometimes we call them the QA team, the validation team, and they do the human test on the application. Once these tests are successful, we are ready to release. Can you hear me? I heard a strange noise. So when the application has been validated by the QA team, then we prepare the deployment on the production environment. So we will deploy on staging environment, and then on the production environment, the real one. And here it's more a task for the operations team. So in this continuous delivery pipeline, we see that we have 3 different teams who are involved: the development team, the QA team, and the ops team. If we model this pipeline, here this is a sample with Java applications. I hope this is familiar to many of us tonight. So we can do the compile on unit tests, then we can run in parallel performance test with JMeter, Selenium test, on Sonar analysis. A quick note on Selenium test: web browser tests are fragile, and sometimes there are glitches that requires us to restart the test. So here we see on this pipeline that we will try several times to run our Selenium test before deciding that the code is broken, the application has introduced a bug. When all our parallel steps, performance, Selenium, and Sonar are successful, we deploy on the user acceptance test environment. Here there will be a human interaction. Somebody will say, yeah, we can deploy to staging. These are the QA people. On staging, when the deployment on staging is successful, then the ops people say, yeah, we are ready to deploy on production. How does this relate to CloudBees and Jenkins? The way it relates to Jenkins is that the continuous integration server, what we used to call the continuous integration server, such as Jenkins, is connecting most of the dots together, most of the steps, except the production environment and maybe the staging environment. This will depend on each organization. And here we see that Jenkins is connecting the source code repository with the place where we do compilation unit test, with binaries repositories such as Nexus, with our Sonar server, with our Selenium environment, JMeter environment, and eventually we will deploy on the user acceptance test environment. So this pipeline is a workflow on we needed in Jenkins to cover workflows and to make them first-class citizen. If I summarize what we need complex pipelines. As I said, we have multiple stages because we deploy in multiple environments. This is non-sequential logic. We have loops, we have forks. I do things in parallel. I will retry my Selenium test. I will join after my parallel steps, and so on. It's a long-running thing because the end-to-end pipeline, including the validation by the QA team, the validation by the ops team, maybe on the staging environment, all this can take days, and so I must be able to restart the server that is running this process, this workflow, when applications are being validated. I have interactions with human. Sometime I will wait for a validation, like when the UAT team, the validation team say, yes, this application version is good, it can be deployed on staging environment. On sometime I will put the workflow on hold, maybe because testing environment, the JMeter environment is under maintenance, things like this. I want to be able to restart some steps. The same scenario where my performance environment is under maintenance. Some build will fail because it's under maintenance, and I want to restart from this step and not restarting the workflow from the beginning. I want to be able to reuse the definition, and I would like to have one clear overview of my process. So this is what we wanted to cover in Jenkins for workflows. Some of you have probably already designed workflows with Jenkins. We had several solutions. The first one was job chaining, where we can chain upstream and downstream project together. The build trigger can be built after other projects are built. Post-build action, I can trigger another build when my build is successful. We had the build flow plugin, which was based on Groovy. It was scripting, not visual. We had the build pipeline, which is very popular, which is a graphical approach, and we had the build delivery pipeline. So we had many solutions, but there were some issues with these solutions. We had many atomic jobs, and it was difficult to maintain dozens of jobs to define one single pipeline, if not dozen, at least 5 to 10. It was difficult to share variables and to share state between jobs. It was, so if you want to share the git commit hash, subversion revision number between your jobs, it's not easy today. We had limited logic. When you want to do a retry, when you want to do something like catch error to be sure to clean up an environment, this was difficult until now. And then when we had to mix different solutions like build triggers, parameterized build flow definition, and so on, it became very complex to maintain. So now we have another solution, a new solution to design workflows with Jenkins. This is called the Jenkins Workflow Engine. It's a beta 7 today, and it will be released very, very soon. We are almost sure to have it for Christmas, and even before. So here you can see a definition of my flow. I will remind you, no, I will get it here. So here, if you remember my flow, I must compile and run unit test. I will run in parallel performance test. I will run sonar analysis, and I will deploy on the testing environment. These are some steps that I define here with my workflow. So I will now cover how this workflow engine works, what is the syntax, what are the capabilities of this workflow scripting language. Let's move to the demo now, and I will review the web interface to see if somebody has a question. If somebody has a question, please feel free to ask. Any question, Alan? Or I can continue. Okay, I will continue.
They can ask questions in the chat window.
Okay.
I don't see any right now.
Please here. Okay, this is coming. Yes, this is coming as a plugin. You are right. So, can you see my screen? I will zoom a bit. Here you can recognize it's a Jenkins. It's a 1590, and I have installed the workflow plugin. This is my workflow. So it's a new style of job for people who are used to Jenkins, and I hope many of you are. So it's a new style of job which is called workflow. Here, let's see my job. You can see it's a very standard job. We reuse the same concept. We have the same build triggers. Discard all builds is the same. All this is the same. And instead of having steps, build steps, I have one big part which is a definition of my workflow. This is a text box, and you can see all my syntax. I will start this workflow, and I will cover in more details what it is while it is executing. Please feel free to ask for any question, and Alan can interrupt me if I need to give more details. So the key features that we wanted to have the entire flow in one concise groovy script. As you could see, I have one groovy script where I can define my loops, my try finally, my fork joins, and so on. I can restart this workflow, Jenkins while the workflow is running. We do it technically using Java serialization of the groovy script which is running. We can allocate slaves, build slaves, slave nodes, it's a synonym on workspaces when we want. So we can create as many workspaces during our workflow as we want. We can jump from one Linux server to a Windows server to do some other task. One note on this is that a workspace cannot span on several servers. A workspace is limited to one server, but you can have several workspaces when you are on one server. You can have a concept of stages to throttle concurrency of builds. And here I will come back to this workflow if you can see it. When it comes to the compile and test phase of my pipeline, I can run as many compilation in parallel as I want if I have many developers who push code simultaneously. However, the performance test, I just have one performance environment, and so I will put a threshold and say I can have at max one concurrent performance test of my application. I can have human interactions, approvals. If I come back to my workflow definition, I see that I have several steps where people have to validate. I will probably not deploy on a user acceptance test environment without getting the approval from the validation team. If some people are working on doing tests on an environment, I will not automate the deployment on it. They will have a push button to decide. And I want to reuse a standard project concept like SCM, artifacts. I want to reuse all the 1,000 open source plugins available on Jenkins, and so on. One question, why did we choose a groovy DSL instead of using a graphical tool to design the workflow? The key reasons are that with a domain scripting language, you have your control flows as usual, your for loop, your try catch, you have your the concept of parallel will be easy to express and so on. We have all the kind of tools that we have out of the box with a scripting language. We can create libraries of functions, of classes, of variable. We can reuse variables to share states between steps of my workflow. All this, I can store the definition of my workflow in a version control system. These are things which are difficult with a graphical designer of workflow. I clearly said that about graphical, I refer to a designer and not to visualization, because for visualization, this is covered with this workflow approach, and I will give you more details. The project setup here, as you could see, I have one workflow is defined as a job. I have a single script for all the steps. Build trigger parameters work the same. Each workflow is a regular workflow Jenkins build. It's displayed in Jenkins in the same way. And I have graphical visualization. Non-sequential logic, I have the parallel syntax. I can do a for loop here on hostname. I have try-catch blocks. I have retries. I have catch errors, things like this. Interaction with humans. In the syntax, I can have my declaration input message. Here, I even define security, saying that the only person allowed to do this interaction are the members of the group QA. And I will have graphical visualization with this pause for input with the deploy to staging button. And in the logs of Jenkins, I have this nice message with its two button deploy to staging or abort. I have restartable build on checkpoints, so I can. This is part of Jenkins Enterprise by CloudBees. It is not part of Jenkins open source, but you can define a checkpoint and you will be able to restart from this checkpoint if you have a failure after. Visualization, this is also part of Jenkins Enterprise. Here you see your dashboard where you have the history of your builds. So this is very familiar to people who already know Jenkins. And you have the duration of each step. The step here, the column is a stage in the workflow syntax. You see the duration. You can retry with the checkpoints. You can download your artifacts and so on. Stages, they are important. They give you the nice name in your visualization. Here is the visualization part of the open source Jenkins, how your flow really executed. So you visualize not the definition, but what really happened. If you have a for loop, you will see all the iterations in your for loop and so on. So here stages give you this visualization and also give you the ability to define the concurrency, a kind of semaphore. And then we have this comprehensible script, one big groovy script, and here you could see functions. I will go back to my demo. Do you have any questions, please? Any questions, or is this okay like this?
Sorrel, there are many questions. Sorrel,
okay.
There are many questions.
I will
like to answer now.
Yes. Okay, if you have all these stops on checkpoints, where is continuous deployment then? Here I will show you. This is the execution that I triggered. I will switch to my workflow definition, and I defined a checkpoint, an input message here. Does the QA app with giving the URL looks good? If yes, we deploy on staging. Okay to deploy. So here, this is a human interaction. You can see here in my logs of Jenkins, I have my nice message. I can look at this application. I just have to click on the link. I see my application. This is Spring Pet Clinic, and I have deployed to staging or abort. I also have this visualization here with the message pause for input, and I can deploy. And with Jenkins Enterprise by CloudBees, you also have, oops, I have to, my screen is too. So here I have this nice icon to trigger. So this is how my job is executing. I can also do retry, so I can restart from a checkpoint if I want, and it will trigger a new execution of my workflow. Do you have this workflow script in share for repository file? So yes, I have a syntax which is load, which allows me to store my workflow definition in a source code repository, maybe in the same repository as the source code of my application, or maybe in an alternate repository, and to load this script. And I can share between many many projects. Yes, we have samples, we will share them. Workflow, oops, it's moving very fast. Workflow is open source. You can check additional videos on CloudBees YouTube. Yes, thank you. Somebody is giving more answers also. For Selenium or quality, tools like Sonar on Jenkins. Yeah, Jenkins, there are plugins for Sonar on many of them. Okay, I will continue my presentation. So this was an overview of the workflow. And this will be key. We think that this will, so yeah, here's the comprehensible scripts, and this will be something familiar for people who use Java on Tomcat. I enter the presenter mode. So here on many of my steps, I had to deploy my application on a test environment. So I define a groovy function. Here it's inline in the same groovy script, but I could load it from an external library. And for people who know Tomcat, you will see the very familiar Catalina base, shutdown.sh, root.war, startup.sh. Here I do a curl to test that my application is properly started. So here you can see that I define my function in my Groovy script and I can reuse them. They can be in the same Groovy script as my workflow definition or in a shared library. It's up to what I want. Is this okay? So this was a presentation of Jenkins workflow. There are several videos available on the internet. And we think that it will really be key to define continuous delivery pipeline. It will be released very soon. Now I will cover another point, which is how to scale Jenkins, how to scale with Jenkins. The kind of problem, how do I scale Jenkins from 10 to 1,000 jobs, 10 to 1,000 projects, 10 to 100 users? How do I comply with the corporate rules of my organization? We want authentication, traceability, and so on. And how do I maintain my continuous integration platform flexible scaling without creating constraints for users? The typical scenario is I start with 5 projects. I have 1 Jenkins standalone, 0 slaves. Then I go to 25 projects, 5 slaves. Then I continue to go up. On maybe one day I have 150 projects on 400 slaves. And it's very, very big. If I have all this on 1 Jenkins master, then I may have performance issues, reliability issues, and I am limited. I know that scale up as a limit. One day the box will be too small and it's a single point of failure. If this Jenkins server fails, everybody is angry, and I am afraid of upgrading versions of Jenkins or of plugins because everybody relies on this. So this is very, very complex. The other approach, instead of scaling up, is a kind of agile growth. We don't say it's horizontally, say it's more viral, because Jenkins is open source, so every project team can install its own Jenkins server. It's very easy. But then it's becoming a mess. There are some things that we cannot do. For example, we have 3 teams with master A, master B, master C. There are many reasons to have different Jenkins master, and we would like to share the masters between the teams, the slaves between the teams, because the hardware is limited in my data center. It's not possible today. I would like to share security information because I have security constraints in my organization. There are top-down things, and we must comply to them. So I want to share security realms on roles to be sure that everybody enable LDAP, Active Directory authentication, and so on. And everybody has role-based access control on its repository. You cannot read the source code the way you want, trigger a build the way you want. And we also want to be able to push configuration and also to push upgrades. Maybe you want to upgrade one plugin on all the nodes at once, or you want to apply a security patch on Jenkins. These are things which are complex today, if not impossible, with Jenkins open source. And here we propose a solution with a cloud-based product called Jenkins Operations Center, which allows you to share as many slaves as possible. You may still keep some dedicated slaves for some teams. Here we see that Master C still keeps 2 slaves. Maybe there are licenses on this special operating system, a special software installed on this slave, so they don't want to share it with the other people. And for the other, we have general purpose build slave. Usually you can have general purpose Linux slave, general purpose Windows slave, and you can share them with all the existing masters, and they just use it when they need it, and they give it back when they don't need it. We can also have a central management of the security realms and roles. We have single sign-on between all the nodes, and we can push upgrade of Jenkins plugins, upgrade of Jenkins core itself on the platform. So this is how we cover scalability with Jenkins Operations Center. I will switch to the demo. Do you have any question? I will switch to this. Any question, please? Here. Okay, so here is a demo Jenkins Operations Center. Here you can see this is a very standard Jenkins interface. The look and feel is the same. On here you have some new icons because this Jenkins Operations Center, which is the orchestrator of my Jenkins infrastructure, is connected to 2 Jenkins servers called Jenkins A and Jenkins B, and is having a shared slave, which this one is a Linux slave, and there is also Windows slaves that I didn't start for the demo. And if I jump on the Jenkins A, you can see that I am still authenticated, and I can run a project. Here, this is a Linux project. And if we look at the history, you can see that the slave that was used to build this job was slave 1, and slave 1 is the shared global slave. It's not a local slave, it's a shared slave. So this is the way we can share resources, we can share slaves between, between masters. So this is executed 15 seconds ago, and it was slave 1. And now I can move to Jenkins B, the master B. I continue to have single sign-on. I'm authenticated, and here I can also trigger my build. And we will see that it will use the same slave 1. Here you see I reuse the slave 1. And on this Jenkins B, I also have some dedicated slaves attached to this master. So here you can see that slave 2 is attached, is only available for this Jenkins server, and I can reuse it. And here, for the people who are familiar with Jenkins, the way we restrict usage of, we select the slave is with labels on the slave. Oops, it's taking time too. And you can see here that I use a label expression to choose the slave that I want, and I run on slave 2. And here, if I look at the history, I will have run on slave 2. So let's switch back to the question. Is the sharing slave feature part of the enterprise version of only? Yes, sharing slaves between Jenkins masters is part of Jenkins Enterprise by CloudBees. It's unfortunately not available in the open source edition. Are there some other questions?
Well, yes, there is one. Is Jenkins an enterprise system application?
Yes. Can it be
Another
run
one?
on? Can it be run on site? The answer is yes. All this is software that you install in your private data center. So even if the name CloudBees refer to the cloud, these are software that you install. We provide RPM package, Debian package on standalone zip file archive. Okay. Shall we move to Puppet on hardcore DevOps scripting? Okay. So now I will cover, so yeah, let's summarize what we see with Jenkins Operations Center by CloudBees. Here we covered how we can scale horizontally Jenkins in the organization to give flexibility to the project team, ensuring that they have the small masters that they like instead of one super big master. And we combine this flexibility for project team with some infrastructure requirements such as sharing hardware, on some security compliance requirements such as ensuring that authentication and authorization with roles is implemented, enabled on each continuous integration server. And I can also have a global management of this Jenkins infrastructure, pushing new versions of Jenkins master, Jenkins core, or of plugins to all the connected masters. So this was an overview of Jenkins Operations Center to scale in your Jenkins in your organization. Now I will cover continuous delivery traceability with Jenkins on Puppet and Chef. First, let's agree on how I will cover with Puppet, and we will see that the concept also apply with Chef. There are different ways to use Puppet in an organization. The first approach that we see usually for production style environment, and I know some people like to do it differently, but what we see is the approach with master on agents. So here I have one Puppet master on my environment on several agents. So here an application server, let's say it's running the pet clinic Java application with Tomcat. I will have my Puppet agent. It will be connected to the master. When I want to deploy my pet clinic application, I will push the WAR file of the Java application on all the manifest on modules, Puppet manifest on modules to the master, and it will apply this to the agent when needed. So this is a kind of cron-based approach. And we see that there is another approach which is very popular in development environments, which is a standalone Puppet agent approach, where my Puppet agent is not connected to a Puppet master. I directly run Puppet apply on this agent. So instead of a polling mechanism, it's a push approach where I trigger the update of the agent. On here, I provide the WAR file on the Puppet manifest on modules on the agent. And then I will cover a next step for the test environment. Many people like this approach is to use Vagrant to automate your Puppet agent setup, your server setup. So here, Vagrant has a tight integration with Puppet to be able to run Puppet apply on the startup of your Vagrant box. So here, I will provide to Vagrant my Puppet manifest on module, my WAR file. With Vagrant, I am able to create a new clean version of my box, of my server, whenever I want. So I can put it, throw it away and recreate from scratch to be sure that the setup is clean. Okay? I will see if there are some questions, because then we will cover the integration. Other people are hearing audio. No. Okay, no question. So I will continue with this. So the next step is how do I connect this Puppet environment with my Jenkins CI server? What I will say is that Jenkins will build the Java application. This is a standard thing. We are used to it. Then I need deployment modules on deployment manifest. I can say that it's also Jenkins that can collect them, so they will be related to my application. I will have my pet clinic module, Puppet module. On Jenkins, we'll take both the Java application on the Puppet modules on manifest, and it will trigger a provision of Vagrant. So it will push a WAR file, the Puppet manifest on modules to Vagrant to update my test server. Okay. And then I will want one other thing, and this I will want it on all my Puppet environments. So maybe also the production environment. I will want notifications from Puppet so that I know in Jenkins that my artifact, my WAR file has been deployed. Okay, so I will cover in 3 steps how I do my Puppet agent integration, Puppet integration to deploy a Java application with Tomcat. Then I will cover how I integrate this Puppet setup with Vagrant, and then how I integrate it with Jenkins. 3 steps: pure Puppet, Puppet with Vagrant, and then Jenkins to automate Vagrant. This is the integration that I will show you when I generate a WAR file. I want to be able to know where it has been deployed in my environment. So let's go to the demo time. Is somebody, oh, there is somebody say Puppet and Chef are better suited for infrastructure configuration on deployment tools like deploy it on so on are better suited for application deployment. Some people think like this. I don't want to debate on whether you should use Puppet to deploy a WAR file. There are some people who would prefer to use Xibia Labs XL deploy, Midvision rapid deploy, and so on. These are other scenarios. Today I do a Puppet, pure Puppet scenario, and we see that many organizations like it like this. So please accept that I will cover today Puppet, Chef, and we could organize another webinar to cover tools like XL deploy, which was named deploy. So here, yeah, if you can see my screen, I have my module. This is a standard Puppet module. I will declare dependencies on the official Puppet Labs Tomcat module. What if deployment includes multiple components like a WAR? This kind of orchestration would require more steps in my pipeline. So this question was from MW2389. So it would add complexity to the scenario. Today I will already cover the Java application deployment. And if we have time, I will cover the others after. So here, to do my Tomcat deployment with Puppet, I will use the Puppet Labs Tomcat module, the Puppet Labs Java module to install the JVM, on the Puppet Lab firewall, because when I start a Linux server from scratch, I want to set up the firewall to not open everything. These are my prerequisites. It's a standard metadata.json Puppet descriptor. Here is my pet clinic module. So here is my class. I have a default parameter which is a WAR file URL. By default, I collect it, I grab it on GitHub, but I will also provide my local one. When I start up my Linux server, I will demo today with CentOS. I will start with setting up the firewall to only allow on port 8080. firewall. Then I will ensure that I install a JDK. Then I will ensure that I install Tomcat 8. Here I grab Tomcat from Apache distribution site. Then I have a dirty workaround, so please accept it. I could give more details later. And then I will install my WAR file, the pet clinic WAR file, and I will grab it from the URL, which is a parameter with the default value. Then I will use the Jenkins track statement, which allows me to notify Jenkins. Sometime when I just use the file functions from Puppet, it's automatically integrated. Sometimes I have to do it manually. And then I will start my Tomcat service. So let me summarize. When the Linux server starts, I set up the firewall, I install the JVM, I install Tomcat, I install the WAR file, and I start Tomcat. Okay? So I will delete my existing Vagrant container. I can remove it. And I will trigger it from Jenkins so that we will see the logs and we will understand what happens. So while this is running, please let me come back to this Puppet module. So we know that in Puppet, to apply this, I must run Puppet apply on my computer. Now, how I will cover the integration of this Puppet module. This comes from a source code repository. It's a GitHub repository. And I will integrate it with Vagrant to start this Pet Clinic Tomcat application in a Vagrant container. Here, if you look at my project structure, I have my Vagrant file. My Vagrant file, I will use the Puppet provisioner. There is a concept of provisioner in Vagrant, which are steps that are run when you start the container. On here, I will say that I want to apply a Puppet apply as a provisioning step of my computer, of my server. I also have a preliminary step, which is a shell step, because I will install my Puppet modules, Puppet Lab, stdlib, Java, Tomcat, and Firewall. So here, this shell step will install, download the Puppet modules from Puppet Labs at the startup of my Linux box. There are other approaches to provision these standard modules. One is called librarian Puppet. Other approaches are based on Git links with Gits. Today I do it with this Puppet module install approach. On here, I will tell Vagrant to provision with my module. On my default PP module will just run this Pet Clinic class. And when I am in Jenkins, here I will take the petclinic.war that is local to my module, and this one is generated by my Jenkins build. Let's see how this is running, because now we will see the logs. Here, for the people we are familiar with, oh, I forgot to mention, sorry. I define in my Vagrant file that I use Puppet Lab CentOS Puppet distribution. So I took CentOS because most of our production environment are Red Hat Enterprise Linux or CentOS. So like this, it's common for everybody. So if I look at my logs, here you will see that Puppet is installing my modules, Puppet Lab Java, and so on. And then here, so I have installed all my modules. Now Puppet is configuring my application. Here it has run the Puppet firewall configuration. There is a small bug with CentOS 7 on the Puppet Labs firewall module, but it is applied. On here you can see that the Puppet Labs Tomcat module has downloaded Tomcat and is now installing petclinic.war, so it takes few minutes and this is running. So here I show how I can automate the installation of a Linux Tomcat server with petclinic WAR file, on how I can automate all this with Vagrant. This is a project that you can find on GitHub. So anybody who has Vagrant, maybe with VirtualBox or maybe with VMware Fusion, can run this locally. Here I am provisioning. Yeah, it's almost the end. In theory, it will be done. Here I will connect to my box. Please accept that I did a port binding. This is localhost. So here Tomcat 8.0.15 is installed in my Vagrant box. And if I look at petclinic, no, it's not yet available. Oh. Oh la la, something wrong happened. This is a demo effect. I have to double check. So I will trigger another build to be sure that this works, because it's supposed to work. So here we have seen that I have the automation of my Puppet project with Vagrant, and now the way I integrate it with Jenkins is very simply with view enter presentation mode. So you can see here that my first step will be to generate the petclinic.war application. I do it with the package goal. And then I will get the source code of another Git repository to get the Vagrant module definition. I will drop in this Vagrant module definition the WAR file that I have built previously, and I will call Vagrant up Vagrant provision. Vagrant provision will apply, will execute Puppet apply. So this is the steps of my build. And now hopefully, yeah, here you see that petclinic has been installed on this Linux box. So when I double check here, my WAR file has been deployed. I have the MD5 of this WAR file, and I will use this for the notification. I will check if you have any questions. Can we integrate Puppet plugin with the workflow plugin? Yes, this was a question. Here is the demo. So the way I integrated it, so I call my Puppet apply through Vagrant. Oops, sorry. No, I must see here. So here I call Puppet apply with Vagrant, and then I have the Puppet deployment notification. Let's look at this. So here, when I look at this generated WAR file, I can see that the WAR file, which the signature is identified by the MD5, and I can see that it has been deployed by Puppet on this server. Okay, there is a double message. I have a glitch to fix. But here I can see that using Jenkins workflow, I could integrate with the Puppet deployment notification plugin to get notification on, to give to the project team the visibility that their application has been deployed with Puppet on their environment. Are there other questions?
Yes,
I
Cyril,
went
there was
pretty
another
quickly
one.
on Puppet.
Excuse me, Cyril.
Yes.
There was one. What if deployment includes multiple components, like a WAR and middleware and DB? Is there a way to aggregate to provide single pipeline view?
Yes. So yeah, thank you for this question. It's more or less what I did with the previous pipeline. If you remember this pipeline, I do many steps. Here, the steps that I do, they are not exactly several components, but in fact they are. Please believe me when I say they are. It's when I deploy on an environment. Here you can see that I deploy my WAR file. I will run JMeter test. So here I will deploy my WAR file. Then I will run my JMeter test, which run on another component of my environment, and then I shut down the application. So somebody is saying not the example itself, the tech needed to run it. You want me to run the test? I think it's already running in this part. So what I would do is before showing the logs, what I would do if I have maybe to reload the database also, I would prepare a groovy library that will do the invocation to the database, loading the good dataset. Maybe I will check out the dataset from another Git repository or something like this, or from a file server if the volume is big, and I will orchestrate all these steps from my environment. So here the steps that I showed is that I deploy the Tomcat application and I run JMeter, which is on the load tester. So on 2 servers I work in this environment. I would add more steps, maybe working with Puppet, doing an SSH on a remote Puppet server, or something like this. Then the logs, here we could see, yes, another question, please.
Yes, Cyril, the two-part question. Is every part of the workflow Puppet example freely available? And then secondly...
Yes, they are.
Not the example itself, the tech needed to run it. So they are. And then is there a way to take care VF rollback using workflow? Or maybe, is there a way to take care of using workflow?
Yes, there is a way to take care of rollback with workflow. On here, excuse me, I will show you the syntax. Here, this is a syntax reference card of the workflow, and there is a catch error step. So you can define in a workflow a catch error step that will do a rollback. And as part of future improvement of workflow, CloudBees plans in its Jenkins Enterprise version to do some kind of blue-green deployment with better rollback, but you can code them manually. If I take my IDE, I would say that here, if the deploy step fails, I would have something like a catch error step where I would do something like deploy previous version. So it means that I need to have access somewhere to the previous version and so on. Maybe I could have read the number of the previous version from a file or something like this, and so be able to reload it easily. But this is an approach that I would have. Another approach could be try catch, this could also work. But catch error is intended for this kind of rollbacks. Do you have, oops,
So
60
one other
minutes?
question, Cyril. Do you have a
Yes.
graphical view of schema, the server infrastructure, servers, load balancers, JMeter, host, etc.?
Do I have a graphical visualization? No. So, yeah, I propose to cover this after the wrap-up of the webinar for people who can just say 60 minutes, if this is okay for the person who asks the question.
Okay, good.
Yeah, because I'm sorry, this can take time to clearly understand what, because here I do it with a demo environment. So Jenkins with Puppet, it's available on the slide deck. What we have is Jenkins deployment notification plugin, Puppet module for Jenkins tracking, Puppet Labs plugin for Jenkins, which is another plugin to integrate with Jenkins. We have a CloudBees DevOps page where we give many details. On this demo tonight, there are two things. This Git repository that I already shared with you, and then the gist of the workflows that I will share just after. When it comes to Chef, the concepts are very similar, and for the people who know Chef and Puppet, they may have identified that it will be the same story. We will still be based on the deployment notification plugin. You can still manage your your Chef recipe in a source code repository, and then you can use Chef Solo on your development testing environment, on Chef with the Chef server, on your real production style environment. We support these two modes. You have this concept of Chef tracking. It's also based on MD5 file, checksum of the files. And you have more detail on our DevOps page. As a conclusion, because it's time now, we have covered three subjects today. First is the new Jenkins workflow feature, new workflow engine to implement continuous delivery pipelines. The second part was how Jenkins Operations Center by CloudBees helps you to scale Jenkins in your organization in a scale-out manner, keeping flexibility for your dev teams, your users. And the last part was deployments with Puppets. It also works with Chef on how you can integrate all these together. And as somebody noticed, we don't claim that using Puppet is the only solution to deploy application with continuous integration server like Jenkins. You can also use shell scripts, use Xibia Labs, Excel Deploy, Midvision Rapid Deploy, and so on. There are many tools. Puppet is just one style that is important to many people, so we covered it tonight. Thank you very much. Shall we switch back to the Q&A?
Yes, Cyril, thank you very much. This was a terrific presentation, and I'm sure our audience very, very much appreciated it. I'd like to ask if anyone has any additional questions. Now would be a good time, and I know there were probably some questions that we missed because they were coming so quickly, and I apologize. So if you can, if we have not answered your question yet, please ask again, and we can try to answer them. And while we're waiting, I know several people asked, is this webinar going to be available for replay? And yes, we are recording the audio and the visuals, and I will try to have it up for replay within the next 24 to 48 hours. It'll be hosted from DevOps.com, so you'll be able to find it on there, as well as the Jenkins, the CloudBees folks. We'll give them the URL as well, so you can probably get to it through CloudBees as well. Okay, so Steve Clark, where can I find? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so here something which is very valuable is the Jenkins workflow. Where can I find things about Jenkins workflow? So I have shared the repo, the Jenkins repo, where you can find the source code, and you will see that my colleagues, Jesse Glick, we already new versions of many things. Then you will find, if you can see my screen, the things that you have to install. You will see things like workflow API. Okay, if you install the workflow aggregator plugin, you just have to install the workflow aggregator plugin, and then it will install all the plugins related to workflow. And take one of the latest Jenkins version.
Okay, Sorel, the next question is from Heather. Are you aware of a best practice standards guideline for enterprise Jenkins usage that can be reviewed and modified to fit our business? Can you provide a source?
How to, okay, so here best practice, when you say reviewed and modified, yes, I will use another slide deck, please. So please forgive me. This is a CloudBees slide deck, but we cover it here. So I would say for security, so when we say enterprise and so on, I think we mean security. First, you need to enable security, such as CloudBees role-based access control, or also, or otherwise there is the open source metric-based security, things like this. And I strongly recommend you to use the Audit plugin. It's an open source plugin that will give you details. It's a kind of Apache access logs where you see who triggered what, who decided what. And the third piece is the job configuration history. So please let me find all this and share the links. Jenkins Audit plugins. On Jenkins Audit plugin, you can send it to syslog, so I like it very much. You are sure that it cannot be modified by somebody. Jenkins Jenkins Audit Trail, there is the home page. I'm sorry, I'm Audit Trail plugin. I should send you to the, yeah, this page is much more beautiful. And here you can see that you can output to syslog, so security people will really like it. And then there is another Jenkins job configuration history. Which will give you the details once you know that somebody has modified the job. Then if you want to understand how the job configuration have been modified, here you will have the answer. And you must, of course, secure your Jenkins. Do we have another question? I don't have links that clearly summarize all this. I'm sorry.
Sorel, no, I do not see any other questions.
Infraschema, yeah. From Jan. I think, yeah, Jan, we met each other. And I thank you for the info. Standard practice for, Israel is asking for standard practice for code check-in, unit test execution on deployment. I would say that for check-in, you may want to disable in Git repository the ability to override the history of the source code to be sure that you can audit what has been modified. Then you should have a very good audit of your binaries. Keep the binaries, all the binaries that have been deployed on the production system. And for these tools like Nexus and Artifactory, can help you because you can configure them to not accept overwrites of versions. And then the deployment procedure, you must have audit on the deployment procedure. Here I would say that it's the Puppet people, it's the Puppet admins, the Xibia Labs, the Excel deploy admins, or whatever deployment tool admin that must ensure that they have the traceability. Jenkins is just the orchestrator of all these tools. We have to track the signature of what we produce, but then every component has to do it. So you wanted to have the slides, will they be made available? Yes, they will. The schema of the diagram of the infrastructure. The diagram of the infrastructure today is, I did all the demo on my local box. So I start Jenkins locally. Let's see first this this groovy script, which is a workflow demonstration where I start several Tomcat server. You can see as I run on localhost, I will use different port names, port values, listen port for all my environments, so that I don't have conflicts. And then when all the nodes here, Linux, in fact, they are fake. I run on a MacBox, but I cheated and I said that I have a label which is Linux on every node. So here you can see that I use a label Linux, which is a bit cheating, but it would work also. Then if I continue my explanation, I will start Tomcat. So here you will see that I will start Tomcat on 81 and 82 or 83. I have various Tomcat Catalina base like QA, dev, and so on. And I run a startup. I shut down if needed, startup. And at the end of each step, to free the memory of my computer, I do shutdown. So everything is in memory. And then for Vagrant on Puppet, everything is local. You can see it here. You can see that this is a Vagrant box provisioned by Puppet, sorry. And I have defined in my configuration, this is part of the setup, but it's in the Vagrant box, so you can find it on GitHub. I have asked Vagrant to set up a private network, which will be DHCP, so that I have visibility between my guest, which is CentOS with Tomcat by Puppet, on my host, which is my Mac, and I needed this private network because Puppet sends the notification reports to the Mac because Jenkins is hosted on the Mac. Do you have any other questions? Please feel free to ask for any question, and if you want more detail on what I have said. How to use Jenkins to deploy to 100 AWS server, but in batch of 5 at a time. Rob Mitchell, do you mean to deploy applications or to deploy EC2 slaves? If it is to deploy EC2 slaves, I would say that you can use Jenkins EC2 Cloud plugin. If it is application, here, if you have a complex rollout scenario, I would say, yeah, I would say something else is that the deployment tool used by Jenkins should also be used by the ops team. This is key. And so there should not be intelligence in the deployment. Excuse me. Do I have it here? I think I have it on this slide deck. What we... No, I don't have it. Sorry, I have to choose. But what we think is that if you have a complex deployment, or maybe almost all the deployment, the intelligence should not be defined in Jenkins. It should be defined in the deployment tool, so that the ops team can run this tool also on the production environment. So here, please let me find this slide. Oh, will I find it? Yeah. Okay. So if we discuss of this, the question more of what tool do I use between Jenkins and my environment to deploy is I must be sure to use the same deployment automation for the production environment, and usually it's Optim who push the button on from Jenkins. I want to reuse the same technology here so that I test this technology in my Jenkins environment. It's part of the continuous delivery pipeline to test the deployment automation. So I would say that the technology is intelligent to deploy 5 by 5 on 100 AWS servers. It should be your deployment tool, maybe some intelligence in Puppet, or maybe with a deployment tool. Sorry, another question. I saw Jenkins is used to deploy to production server as well. Rob, it depends on the organization, but usually the ops team, the people who are in charge of the production environment, they use another tool. We know some people who use Jenkins to automate the deployment on the production environment. It depends. If it's the same, I will still use a shell script orchestrator or a deployment tool. I like the open source Rundeck solution to orchestrate deployments. Some people that say that sometimes it touches a limit and it becomes too complex to maintain, but some people find it nice. There are other tools for more complex deployment. I think that Jenkins should just orchestrate these tools. This tool should expose an API. APIs are key, SDK and or APIs that Jenkins will trigger. Any other question, please? Please, if you have a question.
Sorrel, while we are waiting for questions, I wanted to announce that the winner of the $100 Amazon gift card is Rasmus, I'm going to mess up his name, Prestholm. Rasmus Prestholm, I've already contacted him, and he is today's winner of the Amazon gift card. Yes. I don't see any other questions coming in. And Rasmus, thanks. I did the best I could. Anyway, if we don't have any other questions, Sorrel, let me thank you for providing a wonderful, wonderful webinar. You know, many of our listeners always want to have more technical information, and this certainly was a very technical presentation that I hope everyone appreciated. We will be posting the link to the replay on DevOps.com, providing it to the CloudBees folks, so it'll be available through the community. I anticipate that, as I said, within the next day or two. Nothing else. I mean, we do webinars every week or other week through DevOps.com, and we have a lot of this kind of information on articles at DevOps.com as well. Sorrel, for anyone who wants to reach maybe you and follow up, what would be the best way to reach you?
What will be the best way? Yeah, I just shared some slide. It was not with DevOps.com, but I recently presented, I had a slide presentation for pure workflow. This could help. And the best way to get updates from me is to contact me at, here it is, cleclerc@cloudbees.com. It's I shared it in the chat window. And you have my Twitter name on the slide deck.
Yes. Okay, Sorrel, again, thanks so much to you and CloudBees for appearing here today. There are some other questions.
Oh. Yeah, can Jenkins manage traceability for software deployed in a pro environment until its source code? So here it's a question from Sibeltran. I would say to have the traceability from source code to the production environment, the first thing is that any application deployed on the production system should embed its git commit hash or its subversion revision number, whatever, so that you can immediately link them together. Another thing is that so with this you know what is the source code, you know what is that has been used on this application. Then we should also want to be able to have traceability of the build process, because how was the source code built, which version of the JVM, which version of Maven, whatever. On here, what I would do is that I would use the MD5 fingerprint feature in Jenkins to be able to identify which build has been used to create which version of your WAR file of the application that you have deployed on the production system. Today, there are many bits that you need to connect manually. There are APIs in Jenkins to get this. Unfortunately, Maven, I think, do not inject the git commit hash in the generated jar file or WAR file, and I think it's similar for Gradle by default, or most of the other tools. You would have manual steps, but this is the way I would do it. Git commit hash, MD5 of the generated artifact to find out which build execution has been used. And then in this build execution, I would maybe dump the environment like JVM version and so on to have this in the logs. A bit manual, but we can get it.
So we've run obviously well over an hour. I think we've answered most everyone's questions. Again, I think we're going to draw close to it here now, everyone. Thank you again for attending. Thank you to CloudBees. This is Alan Schimmel for DevOps.com, and have a great day.